Hello, I'm Hushcho, and welcome to Let's H. I thought I'd catch you up on some of the things I was doing. My project Occultist is actually really cool, and it's a multimedia thing, so please do check it out. It's in the form of a webcomic, but it has a lot of other multimedia stuff around it, and it has an in-universe perspective that it's a primetime TV series. So it's got supernatural investigation stuff and a modern fantasy vibe that I think you'll really enjoy. Plus it's got a mild satirical parody kind of element to it as well. So please check out all of my stuff. Check out all the links in the blurb. Subscribe if you like. Become a patron on Patreon. It really helps me out. Thanks. So this week, I'm reviewing another gay-themed film. It's called Love or Whatever. It's actually a charming film that I came away from with very positive thoughts. I wasn't initially enchanted with it, but as I started to get the sort of tone that it was presenting, I liked it a lot more. It's the kind of film that doesn't take itself too seriously, but it takes itself just seriously enough to touch on some close-to-home topics that will likely affect a number of viewers. There were points in it where I felt personally affected by things that were said or things that happened, even though the situations were often treated as a bit over the top. The characters were delightfully weird too, which is something that delighted me, but I'll talk a bit more about that later. Overall, the film seemed to me to be almost a hidden gem. I hadn't heard of it really, but that made it all the more delightful to discover, since I hadn't heard much of anything about it, and I didn't really know what to expect going in. The film's main character is named Corey. He's a boring therapist with a life that's way too planned. He's decided to commit to his boyfriend, and so he's got rings for both of them. But his boyfriend finds the rings and becomes frightened of commitment. When the hot pizza boy arrives, that's just about enough to make John run for the hills, in a way. Once Corey is ready to pop the commitment to John, they both end up confessing the wrong thing at the wrong time. Corey confesses that he wanted to commit. John confesses that, well, he may be bisexual. He doesn't tell Corey at the time, but he had a drunken fling with a woman in the bar, who turns out to be one of Corey's patients, which he figures out later. And there's all kinds of hilarious over-the-top stuff that Corey has to deal with in the office, which makes it even funnier and more of a contrast that he's so boring by comparison. At first you kind of think like maybe he's an asshole because he's a little bit too boring. But then you kind of notice that it's the movie trying to play up the fact that he has somewhere to evolve. He has somewhere to go. The character is not perfect at the beginning because he needs to have somewhere to go. You don't perfectly sympathize with him. I mean, maybe you do, but I didn't. He's off, he's weird, he's uncommon, and that's a good thing. One of the things that stood out to me was an early dating sequence where Corey had found some online dates and had set up all of them to come and do a test date with him. This is something that I feel like, and felt like at the time, many gay movies try and do, and it tends not to work out so well, and I thought this was going to be the same thing. At the time, it seemed to be the same thing, because, as usual, it was a group of people that, until the very end, were not anybody that I would consider laughably unsuitable or anything. Sometimes they go over the top and try and go, oh, these people are crazy, you know, like, who would want to date them? This time it was more like, these are just people that don't seem to jive with his boring ideas. Until the end, which was kind of a funny payoff. But it was probably due to the fact that I've seen that sequence done in so many gay films, and films in general, and very poorly, that I thought that this was going to be the same thing. I see now that it wasn't, and that probably colored my feelings about it at the time. I don't think it was a bad idea, but I needed the ability to look at it on retrospect to truly appreciate it being what it was. It was amusing. I just didn't realize that it was probably supposed to be a commentary on that same thing that I had noticed in so many films. As I'd stated before, pretty much every character in the movie is weird. They're distinctive, they're unique, they're different. Not every character will be a character that you're able to necessarily love from minute one. Some of them you'll like more than others. Others you might think just aren't your type until later in the film where you find yourself growing adjusted to them. This is one of the best messages that I feel like Love or Whatever gives, because In the real world, there are many people that are extremely distinctive. They're different. They're not what you would expect. They're still good people, and they're more than worthy of relationships. But it takes time and it takes effort to get used to them, to understand them, and not just to knee-jerk react to things that society or your upbringing or culture would have you react to in the way that you're expected. It takes effort. You have to learn how to communicate sometimes between two people. Even if they really feel deeply about each other, it takes effort. The people in love or whatever are so distinctive and such contrasts to each other, and sometimes complements, sometimes foils, that it makes it more absorbing and it also makes it feel more realistic. I've often said that reality is not just a series of tragic events happening and people angsting and being assholes. When I see something where nobody has any sense of humor or ever cracks a joke, that seems extremely artificial to me. It usually also seems puerile. It's easier for me to find a comedy more engaging and easier to believe in, especially if it has tones of reality, than something that takes itself way too seriously. Because when something takes itself super seriously, it requires that of the audience too, for the premise to work. You have to take it as seriously as it presents it, or else you're not actually getting the message that the maker intends you to get most of the time. They're engaging you, holding out their hands to you, and you have to take their hand and be a part of that. It's part of what makes some movies so bad they're good, because when you don't do that, when you don't participate at that level, it can be really enjoyable. However, with romantic comedies, it's usually best if they don't take themselves super duper seriously. I agree with Mel Brooks though, it's always best to play comedy straight. Don't play it like you know you're funny or anything like that. Play these characters like they're real people, and that's part of also what makes Love or Whatever so great. There are patently silly moments and ludicrous premises for some of the scenes, but they all play it straight. There are moments in it, like one character who seems to be very inventive in the things that she talks to Corey about, but what she says has meaning. What she says has weight because she plays it very straight. She plays it, and, straight as in, This may be a gay movie review, but that's not what I mean, She plays it seriously enough for us to take seriously, and when the time comes for her to have a meaning with what she says, it actually has a weight to it that's significant, that stays with us. There were moments in the film that really moved me, and at one point, the film does kind of look a little bleak. It gets very serious, and even a little bit dark. It doesn't last long, and it makes the contrast of what happens afterwards even more fulfilling and even more uplifting. But there's a point where they come to a realization that the way things are happening, the way that they're doing things, isn't working. They have to face the things that they've done or failed to do, and that's a big realization for a film that is overall as bright and cheerful as Love or Whatever. It combines these elements so well, and in such an engaging manner. I think that's what I love the most about it. Sometimes people aren't right for each other. Sometimes people don't get along or communicate well at first. Everyone is different. Sometimes, even if you're interested in someone, you have to both grow a bit before you can fit as a pair in a relationship. But ultimately the message that we are given is that not everybody is an asshole. Not everybody's just out for themselves. Not everybody's out there to just do what's good for them. People have strengths and weaknesses. Some people are better at some things than others. I know this seems like a fundamental thing that people should know going in, but it's something we forget too often and all too easily. We expect everybody to be good at the same things that we are. We expect people to understand the same things that we do, and to be able to engage us on the same way that we engage other people. That's simply not realistic, especially in relationships. Relationships are something that have to grow over time, and it takes a lot of effort, a lot of building, and frankly a lot more than what people are usually willing to give into them. Even moments that deal with things that should be a little more serious in our minds, dealing with them, or even maybe put us off, are actually dealt with in a funny way because they're things that we can relate to. Even a woman who has an experience, and I won't go into any more detail about this, you'll have to see the movie, but trust me, it is pretty funny. The way it's played off is actually quite amusing. The woman who has an experience with wildlife, let us say, is played off as very funny. The way that it's played is much more important than the topic that it's played on. This is something that I feel like another film that I was trying to watch completely missed. I was watching another film called The Boy with the Sun in His Eyes, and I don't know if the book is better, but the movie was just a series of one tragic event after another that kept escalating to the point where evidently they thought we were going to find something amusing in a dark way. But even though I can enjoy macabre humor, even though I like a little bit of darkness, once you build it up to a certain point before you've built up anything else, it takes way more effort to get an audience to laugh at that point. You can't just always do that. And there's a lot of issues that people will naturally think deeper about that you don't want them to get too lost in deep thought with, especially if you try and make a joke out of it the very next moment. That's why I feel like The Boy with the Sun in His Eyes failed to engage me initially, and Love or Whatever succeeded all throughout. It started off with me not really knowing if I was going to enjoy the film or not, because some of the things that it brought up were definitely things that are kind of a bummer, or things that cause you to kind of think about some of the other qualities of it. But the way it's acted, the way it's directed, the way it's written, the way the lines come off, it's very natural and you want to believe in it. Even if the situations are sometimes over the top, there is something very real underneath all of it, and you can feel that. You can feel that the characters are believable. You can feel that the actors believe in their characters. Kelsey, for example, is absolutely amazing. You will love her. She is so much fun and so interesting, and she has such a broad range that you believe every time she has a reaction to something. It comes organically, and she's genuinely funny. Naturally, not everything about the film was something that I thought was great. Most of the film was fantastic. I didn't have a problem with hardly any of the film. Some of the things I did think could have been done better. Cheating is an issue that I think needs a lot more dialogue in general, but especially in movies like this, and especially in movies that have something to do with the gay culture. It's one of those things that if you have to ask, you probably need to do a lot more reading than I'm going to be able to describe in a short film review. But ultimately, I'd really like to see in films people talk more about honesty and communication in relationships rather than saying, oh, you were cheating. Because like in this film, for example, Corey at one point apologizes to Pete regarding cheating. And technically, even in the situation, I wouldn't actually call it cheating because they weren't technically in a committed relationship. In fact, it's complicated really sums that up. I don't think they were trying to make it more than it was. I think it was just supposed to be a heartfelt apology, which works very well, but I did want to point out that it's an issue that really needs to be talked about more in these films. I understand exclusive relationships. I understand that sort of desire that a lot of people have. At the same time, it's often oversimplified in films like this, and I just think that a film like Love or Whatever has what it takes to deal with some of the more complex issues, because it does deal with things like very different personalities, unique people. And, for example, Kelsey, she's definitely not a person who's committed to a single partner, and that's okay. That's part of what makes her character great. I just thought it could have been touched upon a little bit more. But it had the contrast of someone who was a good person, Kelsey, and who was very likable, genuinely, who was not like that. I don't know, maybe this is just my own desires talking, because I'd really like to see more dialogue about that in general, but especially in films like this, that do almost everything very, very well, but could have done maybe a little bit more, or maybe could have done one or two things a little better than it did. The only other thing that really stood out to me was the sex scene between Corey and Pete. It was very awkwardly photographed, very awkwardly shot, like we weren't sure where to look. It could have been extremely sensual and even erotic, but it also seemed like the two actors didn't really know what to do, like they didn't know how sex works, and especially not sex between two guys. I don't know if that's actually the case, because their performances were very genuine. They felt real. and I'm not going to pry into anybody's private affairs or anything like that. It doesn't matter to me. However, presumably someone involved with the production would have known how that works. And as the rest of the film was such a good example of knowing your audience and knowing what that audience wants to see, as well as a broader audience and giving a general audience a genuinely amusing film, it seemed a bit weird to me that that would be so oddly and awkwardly photographed. It didn't take away from the film ultimately, and it didn't seem to be that kind of negative painting of sex, especially since other sexual scenes were differently photographed and seemed to be differently handled. Maybe it just didn't come off as right to me because I was expecting something different based on the other interactions, which may have been a point that it was trying to make, that people don't have sex the same way when they're not the same people as two other people. Overall, however, Love or Whatever is a fantastic film and I recommend it unreservedly. It's available at a number of places online. I'm sure you can find it to watch. I would recommend absolutely sitting down to watch this, having a lot of fun. Pop some popcorn, watch it with someone that you like, watch it with a friend, watch it with someone who wants a good laugh. This is a film that you will be able to laugh with that will probably make you feel a lot better about making your own choices, turning to friends, and sometimes doing what you have to do, even if that means changing a little bit, developing as a person, and in a small way growing up a little bit. I recommend Love or Whatever. I think it's a great film. It is, above all, a romantic comedy. It's kind of an off-the-wall, over-the-top at times romantic comedy. If you're worried about the fact that it includes gays and lesbians as main characters, it's really not a big thing. If you're overly worried about that, you probably wouldn't be listening to my review anyway, but if you're really worried about that, it does a very good job of treating people as people and fully realized, fleshed out people, rather than simply defined by their orientations. It's important to the film, and it's an important part of who they are, but the film doesn't revolve around it. And honestly, I can't see anyone mature enough to watch a romantic comedy who would be turned off by that factor. So, take that as you will. I recommend it. I think you should watch it. Let me know how you like it. I hope you'll enjoy it. I always love it when someone takes my film recommendation and absolutely falls in love with a film. So please do check it out, and I hope you will have a wonderful, wonderful time with it. Again, check the blurb for the links to my projects, my webcomics, my websites. Become a patron on Patreon if you like what I do. It's the only way to help me continue doing what I do and to bring this to you. So I really hope you'll think doing it. Even just $5 helps, plus you get a fantastic pin-up for that price. But I do hope you'll consider about tossing me a little bit more, because while $5 helps, more than that would help even more with productions, video, art, comics, and you get even more bonuses for giving more. But I'll end my little spiel there. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I will see you next time for another review on Let's H. Take care. Bye.